Thank you, the organizers, for the opportunity to present this case. I'm going to talk about Museum Nusantara, and this was the Museum Nusantara because Museum Nusantara is closed since the 1st of January 2013. Museum Nusantara was profiled itself as the only museum in the Netherlands which dealt with the history and cultures of Indonesia. And I was for 14 years I was curator in Museum Nusantara until 10 years ago I started in Tropen Museum, and now I'm part of the National Museum of World Cultures. So this was the museum in Delft. And let me first start with a brief history of the collection. Museum Nusantara started in 1864 as the Indies Institute, an institute to educate civil servants who were going to Indonesia about the country, about the language, and especially about the culture, and for this they used objects. And they collected objects from just Delft citizens in the beginning, and then later on from ex-students and partly gifts from international colonial world exhibitions were also given partly to Delft. And it closed in 1900, and in the 1930s it became an ethnographic museum, and it also started to collect objects from other parts of the world. And it was closed during the war, then it reopened in the 50s, and in 1977 it focused solely on Indonesia and was named first Volkenkunde Ethnological Museum Nusantara and later Museum Nusantara. And then in 2013 it closed. When it closed, the city of Delft wanted to de-access the collection, and they were thinking of a proper way to do that, and they came up with the solution that part of the collection should go to Indonesia, but to do that they had to make a bypass for the Dutch law, and then we have the legal system, and which stipulated that part of the collection should stay in the Netherlands, which were of national importance. And then the National Museum of World Cultures came in because we were asked, and we is especially Francine Brinkgever, the other curator of Southeast Asia in this museum, and me to make a selection which is to stay in the Netherlands based on the criteria which we formed together with the Cultural Heritage Agency, a national heritage agency in the Netherlands. And it focused on uniqueness of objects, on objects with a good documentation on the origins of the object, artistic quality, which is just a word which can be debated in combination with the above, connections to historical events, and Delft itself already selected objects which were important for the Delft history. And in cases of fragile collections, the Dutch collection perhaps needed several objects in order to put the objects on display. The majority of the objects go to Indonesia, and at this point the total collection of Nusantara is about 16,000 objects. About 10 to 11,000 objects are to go back to Indonesia. And in this framework we have had, in the last year, we have had 4 meetings with the National Museum of Indonesia, and last week with the Director General of Culture, who came to the museum to discuss this case. And the whole project is also they are looking with us, the National Museum of the Netherlands are looking with us at this process. And in the framework of these short 10 minutes, this is about the composition of the several objects or several kind of objects in the museum. But in the framework of this conference, I decided to talk about colonial objects, in which I very specifically, in the context of this meeting, I mean objects used by Europeans, made for the colonial project, show encounters between Indonesia and Dutch, and this is a request from Indonesia itself, technical objects. And in the discussions we had with the National Museum around 6 weeks ago at the last meeting with the director of the National Museum and her staff, I asked them if there would be any interest for what was then called colonial collections. And they said, yes, we are very much interested because we want to tell the colonial story in the museum, and we can't at this point tell that story enough with the objects we have. So we started to talk about what kind of objects are you interested in. And I start with the oldest colonial objects, which is the furniture of the Dutch Colonial East India Company, mainly made in Jakarta. I think 1 or 2 pieces may have been made in Sri Lanka, and they date at the end of the 17th, beginning of the 18th century. Then the colonial dress, and you see, let me see, I have to push this, I think. These are the typical white clothes of the European men. This is the dress for European women, like these. And this is the home dress of European men at the end of the 19th century. And these are children's clothes. Then this is also made for Europeans. This is a particular case. This has long been described by many museums, and both in Tropen Museum and Volkenkunde we have these collections as well, as folk art dating back till the 13th, 14th century. But only a couple of decennia ago, one discovered that this is not that old at all. It was made by Javanese farmers in East Java when they noticed that archaeologists were digging in the ground. They copied statues, they put them in the ground, and then they pointed out where to dig. And now the Dutch collections are full with these antique statues who were actually made for a market for the Dutch. And here's one of them, Ganesha, but there are about 20 of them in the collection of Nusantara. Models. Models were used in the colonial exhibitions I was talking about, like models, models of weapons and tools for agriculture, ship models, house models, models of pounding machines, etc. And there are about 900 to 1,000 of these kind of models in the collection of Nusantara. Then the beautiful Indies art. This is a specific art, and this is what I call for the colonial project, like the models. This is specific art to depict Indonesia as a peaceful, beautiful, tropical country, completely in control. And this is envisioned by beautiful, sorry, I'm pushing wrong buttons all the time, by beautiful sunsets, for example, and stereotype is the mountain, the paddy fields, I should point out another one, I think, palm trees, that's the typical of, 2 more slides. And then the hybrid objects, which were either objects like these ones, European objects with Indonesian decorations like wayang puppets or peacocks or Indonesian objects like this, which are to cover gifts, but decorated with European motifs. And this is Jogja silver, exactly the same European objects with local motifs, And this is part of it as well. Visiting cards, they are in the collection of Museum Nusantara, but they are not in the Dutch collection. So at first I selected these for the Dutch collection, but now we are going to talk which cards will be of interest for you. And here's an example. This is Raden Tumenggung Joyonegoro, which was the regent of Banjarnegara, a town in Java. Menus from steamships, and here it's very clearly visible that many of the menus are double, so we can easily divide these menus. The menus were menus for the breakfast, the lunch, and the dinner in the steamships between Indonesia and the Netherlands. And at last, the technological objects, and these are objects, for example, the building of tunnels or newspapers, maps, and I don't assume this to be very technical, but these are samples of opium. The Dutch monopolized the opium market in Indonesia, and they gave samples on how big the opium would be, which you could sell to the Indonesian public. This came up only 2 days ago. When we discussed with, and Facebook helps enormously in discussing such matters, when I discussed with one of my colleagues about the colonial collections, he suddenly asked, do you have paintings of Mas Pernghadi? Mas Pernghadi is a famous Dutch, Indonesian drawer, but he also painted and made etchings. And I said, no, there are no etchings in Museum Nusantara, and actually only the Trope Museum has a painting, an oil painting of Pernghadi. But I told her there are etchings, and in total there are 5 etchings. So this is completely open. 2 of them are going to stay in the Netherlands, and 3 can go to Indonesia, and that's open for discussion. Which part of the collection will go to Indonesia and what is going to stay here? Okay, this is the last slide. Thank you.